Welcome to the Breast Cancer Wellness Summit. I'm your host, Edna Campbell. Our first guest today is a force of advocacy, empowerment, and resilience. Rogin is the author of Beat Breast Cancer Like a Boss, and she's a PBS News correspondent. Allie has made it her mission to amplify the voices of those impacted by breast cancer. Allie, thank you so much for joining us here at the Breast Cancer Wellness Summit. After reading your book, I was thinking about the experiences and the survivors that you had contact with, and I just felt like you would just be such an asset to the breast cancer community in your, again, the interactions that you've had, the information that you've been able to gather. So thank you for coming here and sharing that wealth of knowledge with us.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, Emma.
Allie, there's something else that sticks out in your story besides your book. It's the fact that you made a bold and courageous decision at such a young age. After you discovered that you had the BRCA1 gene, you decided that you were going to have a double mastectomy. Allie, please take us through, what you can remember as a 20-year-old getting this information and then navigating the decision-making process to come to the conclusion of a double mastectomy.
Absolutely. I remember it like it was yesterday. My parents had taken me aside when I was, I believe, a sophomore or maybe a junior in college and said, listen, your dad was tested. He carries this genetic mutation. So we feel like you are old enough and mature enough to have that information and to make a decision on your own about what to do with it. And I said, of course, I want to be tested. Mm-hmm. So I went to the NYU Medical Center where I was in school, and I got the blood test, met with a genetic counselor. We went over my family history, which is one of the markers that people look at. And I had breast and ovarian cancer, which are the two diseases that BRCA1 is most connected to. I had it all throughout my dad's side of the family. So I was a very good candidate for having this mutation as well. So a couple weeks later, I went back. The genetic counselor revealed the results, and I felt in that moment I was paralyzed. I was immobile. I was crying. My mom was crying. She was there with me. But it didn't actually take me that long to decide. Once I learned that prophylactic surgery was an option for me, mm-hmm. I made the decision very quickly. What was interesting to me was the counselor in our meetings did not present preventative surgery really as a viable option. She mentioned early surveillance and then possibly catching any breast cancer early. But I was like, once I went to a second opinion and found out that I could just remove this risk, I felt that was the right decision for me. And I think also because I was able to take prophylactic measures, I didn't have some of the emotional trauma that comes with a breast cancer diagnosis. So it was easy for me to look at it as, frankly, and I don't mean to make light of this, but I looked on the bright side and thought, I think my boobs are kind of small. So let me just take this opportunity to get an upgrade. And that's how I looked at it. And that is really what allowed me to keep a positive attitude through the whole experience. And looking back, I can't believe this is almost 20 years ago, not to date myself too much, but it was one of the best decisions I ever made. And it really ingrained in me a sense of willingness to trust my gut and make decisive decisions. Because this was definitely the hardest thing I had been faced with at such a young age.
I can only imagine, Allie. It's remarkable just to hear your, I'm going to say maturity and your ability to cope with such a decision. In your book, Beat Breast Cancer Like a Boss, you had the opportunity to have a variety of women from different walks of life, different professions, different diagnoses, and they also shared their coping mechanisms. Do you recognize some common threads in coping mechanisms for breast cancer survivors?
Absolutely. A few that really stick out are for many of the people that I interviewed in this book, they all tended to be women. They were all women who have achieved some sort of great professional success. And so they happen to be people who really weren't used to working harder at a problem and not seeing results. And a cancer diagnosis forces you to approach that particular problem in a much different way, of course.
Yes.
You can't just work harder at fighting breast cancer and have it, work out for you. But what you can do is help yourself by thinking about it in different ways, employing techniques that I know you have learned and have become skilled in and are teaching others now on the side of your experience. And also kind of rethinking what it means to have success in an area. So I had a lot of people in the book tell me that they would begin breaking down their progress by, days, even hours at a time. So rather than looking at it as one insurmountable goal,
Mm-hmm.
they broke up those milestones into more digestible portions so that one wrote on a whiteboard her radiation appointments and would check them off as she went as kind of a visual manifestation of that progress.
Yes.
And that kind of thing just makes everything easier. So it's all about, as with so many challenges we face, it becomes about your mindset. And I truly believe that if you have a mindset that is not necessarily positive, because I don't think toxic positivity works positivity for positivity's sake. But if you try different ways of looking at things, it can be a really healthy coping mechanism.
Thank you, Allie. As I was reading through some of the ways the the women that you shared in your book were coping, I was really tuning in and identifying with each of those coping mechanisms, and I'm going to say at different phases and times during my recovery process. Um, I think that Cheryl Crow had mentioned that she realized that at this point in time that she had to start paying attention to her own health and well-being and saying no and putting herself first. You had other contributors to your book who were talking about diving into their writing, uh, diving into their characters as they were, in their profession of acting. And I see these all as coping mechanisms, whether it was
Mm-hmm.
avoidance, whether it was just taking on a new identity, whether it was just putting yourself first. These are all coping mechanisms. And I think that what you've highlighted is that these women were high achieving, high performing women, and they found a way, even though it's not, you know, a straight line and there's really no quote unquote infallible strategy. They found a way to cope and manage their recovery.
Absolutely. And I would note that, you don't have to be a multi-platinum, award-winning, Grammy-winning, Emmy-winning professional to employ these methods. These are applicable to anybody at any level. You don't need to be a super high-powered professional. Self-care is not selfish, and I think that's what people, whether you are, working and outside the home and don't have kids and are, really just focused on your career, or whether you have, whether you're a parent and you spend a lot of time with your kids, it's just hard to break out of that cycle of addressing everything that is expected of you. And that's really so much of the breast cancer journey, uh, is not letting those paradigms, those everyday expectations get in the way of you putting yourself first.
Yes, yes. I remember reading about one of the women in your book, and it really resonated with me where she said that we kind of create our lives, and we have this mold that we put ourselves in, and we have these expectations and this ideal of how we want our lives to pan out. And this is an opportunity for us to reinvent ourselves and not be beholden to something that we thought should have been. And I thought that those words were powerful. So, Allie, as a previvor, you taking the preventative action that you took at such a young age, faced with, a genetic, I'm going to say, quote unquote, mutation, I'm sure empowers a lot of people in your situation who may be confronted with making that prophylactic action and having some uncertainty. What would you say to someone in your similar situation?
I've spoken to a number of people throughout the years who believe they might have a genetic mutation. Certainly, the BRCA1 and 2 are the most well known, but there are many others, many that we don't know exist yet, because lots of people have family histories but test negative for all of these mutations that we know about. But a lot of people have come to me and asked me, should I get tested? I will always say, and I firmly believe, that knowledge is power, and that the only thing, there's no one right way to address a genetic proclivity. My course of action is certainly not the only one that's out there. But what I always do say is that I think people do themselves a disservice if they don't seek out these tests, if they believe there's a chance they might be a carrier. Because once you know, you're, forewarned is forearmed. And you can then put into motion a plan of action that works for you, even if that is continued surveillance. That is a perfectly viable option for people who, for one reason or another, do not want to pursue surgery or anything else that's relatively drastic. Of course, access to quality care, insurance coverage, the out-of-pocket costs that are associated even if you have good insurance, those are all factors. But to me, the bottom line, and as an aside, I believe insurance coverage for these mutations for testing for these has gotten a lot better in the years since I went through this back in 2009. But the one thing I always say is get tested, do it. You'll know, it's really scary. I don't discount that one bit, but it becomes less scary once you have that knowledge. I fully believe that the only thing it is empowering, because you no longer have that fear of the unknown. You now have control over it, and you can make decisions that are based on your preferences and not, just this crippling unknowingness.
Without a doubt. Now, Allie, given the fact that we're talking about genetics, I am very much in the know regarding epigenetics. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you say to someone who, maybe would counter your approach with, we're born with the genes we have, and the genetic expression is, pretty much the factors that determine a genetic expression are multifaceted, from environment to food to stress levels to et cetera, et cetera. How would you counter that argument regarding genetic testing and, taking a stance for prophylactic actions?
Yeah, I actually believe that those two can be are not mutually exclusive, and that you can respond to and learn more about your personal genetic expression, and then use a potential mutation simply another data point. It doesn't mean that you have to ignore the ways in which your particular makeup, your environment, your the foods that you're ingesting, the pollution or lack thereof that you're exposed to, all of those factors can inform a decision that you make. And certainly, I would, and look, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor. I do, from everything I've come to understand, these mutations are pretty immutable. You are born with them, and there is, it increases a risk that exponentially. However, certainly your epigenetics come into play as it relates to how you would fight a cancer, what drugs you would be responsive to, what kinds of therapies, whether or not you should have chemo before or after your surgeries, that kinds of thing. So I think all of this data is just a net positive, and you can't have too much data about your everything about you that makes you and your DNA unique.
Without a doubt. Thank you, Allie. Now, that you have moved through your life championing this cause, how has your, I'm going to say, influence, your involvement, your collaboration, your championing breast cancer influenced the way you manage your health and your well-being? I mean, you have a busy schedule as a PBS correspondent. You're an author. You're out there advocating for this illness. And when and how do you find time to manage your own health?
I think I'm inspired by everybody I interviewed for this book, everybody I speak to. I'm really involved in the community with different groups, including FORCE, which is really geared towards people with genetic mutations, with living beyond breast cancer, which is all about life after a diagnosis and after treatment. There's so many wonderful organizations out there. They all have a lot to teach us, but people who have gone through breast cancer, or really any cancer, but of course we're speaking specifically about this community because it is such a unique disease and prevalent. There's some of the healthiest, most proactive about their health that I've met. And so I'm really inspired by them to eat healthy, to exercise, to stay on top of my other routine screenings, things like that. I'm also a big believer in combinations of, Eastern and Western medicine. Prior to, my husband and I did in vitro fertilization. Number one, because we were unable to get pregnant otherwise, but number two, because I was able to screen out those embryos that carried the mutation, which was a blessing because now we have a wonderful 2-year-old daughter who is BRCA normal. She doesn't have to worry about this. But when I was doing that, I believed in Western medicine, and I also believed I got really into yoga during that time, and I started doing acupuncture, which I think absolutely helped me to carry a pregnancy to term. So I think there's it's so much. Our health is so much more than just, getting a prescription for a medication. Also mental health. I mean, I'm a big believer that mental health is health, and that, you're being in a good place mentally can inform your physical well-being. So I'm a big believer in therapy as well.
Wow. You highlighted something that I'm sure I've thought about, but it wasn't this glaring. It's the the sisterhood, the connection, the camaraderie that exists with breast cancer, as opposed to a lot of other ailments out there, right? I think this is just a huge force of women vigilantes who, as you said, you're inspired by the way that they've managed their health on the other side. And I think that is it's a huge testament to how people can come together. And you talk about the many different organizations. There's so much energy and support around breast cancer. Um, you know, I can remember walking in my first Komen walk, and not that I, didn't know or hear about breast cancer, but Allie, it was like, oh my goodness, like look at all these people. Like I felt like they were all my superheroes, you know?
Yeah. It's the worst club with the best members,
Yes.
is a succinct way it's been put to me. And it's really true.
Now, Allie, we've already spoken about your father having the mutation, the BRCA1, and it's not very common that we talk about men in this space. Although we are aware that men do get breast cancer. Um, is that something that he openly talks about or shares with, I'm going to say, the other men in your family? Or have you felt that men respond a little bit differently to this situation?
It's an interesting question because I think broadly, men culturally are expected to behave. There are taboos on showing vulnerability that simply do not exist when it comes to women, which I think are to the detriment of men.
Yes.
And I think that carries into when you're dealing with sickness, which is why it's always so wonderful anytime anybody, but especially men, are transparent and open about their health struggles. My father among them. I mean, he's incredibly open about all of this stuff. We did a bunch of joint interviews together when the book came out. Um, it was very important to him that as soon as he and my mom believed that I was capable of receiving this information and using it responsibly, that they would walk me through the process and walk with me through the whole journey. They really were just incredibly supportive, and I'm so lucky to have had that. My dad also is a prostate cancer survivor himself, and there is a connection. It's not as strong a correlation with BRCA, but there is some research that shows that BRCA carriers have a higher risk, if you're male, of prostate cancer. So he's very open about that as well. He's helped a lot of other men through those journeys, and I think I'm of the belief that sharing struggles like this not only doesn't make you look weak, but I think it makes you look stronger, because everybody's going through something, and if you're open about it, you're recognizing that your story can help others.
Yes. I agree with you, Allie. Thank you for sharing that. Through your work and your personal journey and the lives that you've touched and had the opportunity to interact with, what is one message that you would like to convey to the listeners and viewers regarding your journey?
Yeah, based on my experience, based on the experiences of everybody I've ever talked to about this, it is so important to be your own best advocate in the doctor's office and outside of it. What I've come to understand is, physicians, medical professionals, they typically tend to mean the best, but everybody's human, and so sometimes there may be follow-up questions that they don't think to address, and it falls on the patient to ask those questions, to follow up. Me as a journalist, I have that training to be able to go in and not rest until I get every question answered. But that's a hard muscle to train. And when you're newly diagnosed, that can be a really difficult thing to understand. That it's a hard responsibility. So that's the one thing that honestly was a thread throughout each story I wrote about, that these people had to really stand up for themselves in ways that they hadn't thought about before.
Allie, it is an unfamiliar space to be in, and there's really no way to prepare for it unless you tap into support groups, people around you, people who've gone through it before, because the first time you sit or however many times you have to sit in a doctor's office. Being prepared to ask questions is not an innate thing, like you said. So I think that that is a huge takeaway to empower the listeners and viewers regarding their own journeys. Just be prepared to voice your perspective, concerns, questions, because that's the way you gain clarity. And I think it also helps to alleviate stress and uh, the anxiety around what you're going through. So thank you for sharing that. Allie, if people were going to buy Beat Breast Cancer Like a Boss, where would they go?
Mhm.
And before you even say this, I just want to say that those stories are so, I mean, they are just profound, powerful, and they will cause reflection. And I believe that each and every one of the stories that Allie shares, there's a piece of us in that story. And
Hmm.
I would suggest this book to anyone who is going through it, has gone through it, because we're ever healing, ever learning about this journey. So Allie, where would they go to pick up your book?
Well, I appreciate it, Edna. Thank you so much. And that was the whole reason I wrote the book. Was I thought if one person could pick this up and walk away with it, feeling like something resonated with their own experience, it was worth it. It is available on Amazon. You can buy it wherever books are sold. You can, have your local bookstore order it. And yeah, get in touch with me, ping me on Instagram. If you want to send me a copy, and I'll sign it for you and send it back to you. Yeah, I'm pleased that the book continues to resonate with folks. It's an unfortunate fact that the the readership of people to whom this book would appeal continues to increase as people get diagnosed, which is something that we all have a responsibility to try to fight. And it is incumbent on, our political leaders and members of the government to continue this important research. But what am I trying to say here? Uh, you know, we I hope that one day, my point being that I hope that one day this book becomes obsolete because there is no more breast cancer. But until that day, this community, I've tried to put this book together with the intention of creating a community that folks can tap into whenever they want.
Yes. Thank you, Allie. Thank you very much for your contribution to women who are healing, women who are going through breast cancer, and also serving as someone who can help pull them through this journey with strength and faith and confidence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edna. It's been an honor to speak with you.